I think in general, it's when the language diverts away from process or product and diverts to person is a very clear boundary for me.
I like
Where
that.
it's like, yeah, it's exactly that. Where it's like,
Yeah.
it's less about this product is kind of crap and more about you as a person working here, you are crap.
Welcome to Live Chat with Jen Weaver. Today's guest is Conor Pendergrast, founder of CustomerSuccess.cx. He shares the innovative approach that he created at Expensify for managing spicy customer conversations. You know, those escalations that make your blood pressure go up and feel a little scary. From setting clear boundaries to creating leadership accountability, Conor's strategy prioritizes team well-being while tackling the toughest interactions. Welcome to the podcast. This is Live Chat with Jen Weaver. I'm here with Conor Pendergrast. Would you tell me a little bit more about yourself, what you do, and what your customer support journey is?
It would be my pleasure. So my name is Conor Pendergrast. I run CustomerSuccess.cx, where I help CX professionals, mostly customer support and customer success. Well, mostly customer support, I'd say, and in particular leaders to stabilize and grow their careers. And I do that through coaching, newsletters, free products, and consulting as well. And my journey in customer support, I guess, started. Oh wow! If you really think about it, it started when I worked in a sheet music shop. So when you play music, you buy sheet music. Well, back in the day, Jen, you used to go to a shop and buy music sheet to play music. So if you're a violinist, you would have gone and done that. And that was probably my first customer-facing job, and I was awful at it. I was reflecting on this a couple of days ago, where I was like, "Wow, that was my first customer-facing job, and I was just a terrible employee." And so. To Liz, I apologize, and I promise I'm better now. And to any future clients or employers, good news, I'm considerably better at everything I do now than I was 20 years ago when I was a student and just working in that shop on a Friday to get beer to drink on that Friday, and then I would also come in on a Saturday and make slightly more money and eventually break even. After that, I worked in a social care company doing the computers, generally speaking, and then went to Expensify and worked there for about a decade on the senior leadership side eventually within customer support. And then, left in February 2024 and have been doing my own thing since then.
That's fantastic. That sounds like an exciting year for you this year.
It's been a real exciting year, yes. As well as having two children as well, and my wife also just finished her PhD, so it's been we're all quite tired and busy, but things are good.
That's great. I love it. Oh, well, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Can't wait to hear about the process that you are going to share with us. But first, do you have a joke for me?
Oh boy, do I have a joke! Yes. So, why did the customer support agent bring a ladder to work?
Don't know why.
Because they heard that CSAT scores were through the roof.
Nice.
I could barely keep a straight face. That's a terrible joke.
That's great. Well, it's a good problem to have.
Absolutely. Sure. Yes.
Yeah. If you've got a roof rack on your car, throw a ladder on it. Sure. Why not?
Obviously. Yeah. Bring a ladder to work.
Yeah. I would love to hear about this this process that I don't know much about yet. So I'll be learning about it along with everybody else.
How exciting. Yeah. Segueing into something totally different, bringing the mood down. So while I worked at Expensify, I was on the senior leadership team, as I mentioned, and also I had a heavy focus on customer support and customer success, because that was I would say one of my main interests, and how I found a lot of joy and value and excitement at work. So for some background context, one of the things that Expensify did and became quite renowned for sometimes was taking big swings at addressing difficult social topics, we'll say, and in particular, I'm thinking about a time that we advocated for a particular political candidate in a contentious election, we'll say, about let's say maybe like 8 years ago or so, and how we did that was by Well, by sending newsletters about it to our customers, and that was like millions of people. And so that was one example. We would also do things like in product on our sign in page. We would put things, social causes we cared about, and try and promote those. And that also, I would say, both of those approaches that we took brought on some heated and interesting replies. And so our support team would be the people who would get a lot of those replies, and they found them quite challenging to engage with a lot of the time. And whenever we launched one of those campaigns, it would cause quite a bit of stress for our support team. Obviously, suddenly they're being engaged with on topics that they're like, "Well, I don't understand about democracy in the United States. What's this got to do with me? I don't understand. This person's making a point about the United States of America being like not a republic or a democracy, or like what are they talking about?"
And
And
were they
so
a BPO? So were they out of the country?
we actually had a mix. So we had outsourced support team and internal support team as well. We did have it tiered, but those would tend to like our outsourced support teams would very quickly be like, well, I don't know, what are we supposed to do here? We don't have a process for this. So it would also sometimes bring in some of the conversations would sometimes devolve into less friendly language and more abusive language, and sometimes threats and that sort of thing. And alongside that, I guess occasionally once you hit a certain scale, some customer support interactions even devolve into those as well, where people reach that tipping point of frustration where they start to take it out on whoever's in front of them. So based on that context, what we did was introduced automatic and manual processes for bringing those interactions, for bringing those conversations specifically to our company's senior leadership team, and having them be responsible for managing those interactions. So at Expensify, the senior leadership team was the senior leaders, which is the team that I was on, directors, and the C-suite as well. And so it was quite novel in a lot of ways, because you would end up talking to sometimes David, the CEO, which I found to be quite a good thing, because I would say he was at the forefront of advocating for a lot of the messaging that we were sending. And so it was nice to see him sort of take on responsibility for engaging with people as well after the fact. So what we did was we set up, as I said, manual and automatic processes there. So this is a project that I led, and one of the ways that we did it automatically was we'd look through a list of words, and you could imagine what some of those words were, and we would automatically move the conversation if it hit sort of those words. Most of the time, that's actually, I'd say probably after our initial surge of conversations, a lot of the time that would be someone like accidentally typos a word, and then it gets sent the wrong way.
So there were definitely periods of time where this was more crucial, right after an announcement or a newsletter, and so that would.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And part of it was just like, once you've sent that first initial big newsletter, doesn't matter what you're saying in subsequent newsletters. It could be like product announcements that have nothing to do with political candidates, but people will still reply to it and reinforce what they were saying in a previous message and that kind of thing. And so that was the automatic side of it. But the manual side of it as well was, even in the absence of particular swear words, even in the absence of particular language, if one of our colleagues, if one of our support teams felt like a conversation was devolving to a certain point where the customer was just, we've all seen this sort of behavior sometimes, unfortunately, where they get more abusive, where they get sexist, where they get racist, anything like that, then they can send it over to our senior leadership team to engage with the conversation. The aim, and for us as senior leaders, what our aims were, de-escalation and learning as well. Like if it's a topic that we don't know much about, or if it's a topic that we do know something about, but there's some novel arguments against it, then we try to actually learn from it and see, like, what is it that we can adjust in what we're saying, where can we change our minds and that kind of thing, or how can we change their minds some of the time as well. In the de-escalation sense, if we're not able to de-escalate it, a lot of the time it's just like, hey, no, that's not how we expect you to treat our teams. That's not how we expect to treat you.
Setting boundaries.
Sets clear, unequivocal boundaries. And sometimes it would end up being quite funny as well, because at that point they'd be like, "Oh, I'm going to go to your CEO," and then our CEO would be like at the thing, being like, "I am the CEO. Like you are talking to me."
Ah,
Um,
the buck stops here.
but yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, no, no, we've said no 16 times. And actually, I am just very clearly saying no. It's not like someone who doesn't know what they're doing. We have clear processes around this. And so, in the event that we weren't able to de-escalate the situation, then we also had the option to either temporarily or block conversations as well, just because we considered that to be like not negotiable. Like you can't just abuse our support team. It's just not part of the deal.
Mhm. So those were some
Yeah.
features of the help desk you were using, the ability to block.
Well, this
And
is this is this is why it was actually quite a bit of a it was quite a significant project, because at the time at Expensify, and still now, had rolled out our own custom built customer interaction system, basically, where everything was run on top of Expensify's own systems. So the nice part of that is that you can kind of do whatever you want with it. So
Mhm.
when I was designing the project and I was describing the problem and the solutions, and how it should work, I was the one saying like, okay, we should block for this period of time, and then allow for unblocking automatically, those kind of ideas. And so that was part of it, was being able to design it exactly to our needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. How did this land on your desk in the first place? Did you have support specialists who were saying, "Hey, you're my boss. This is not going well. What should I do here?" Or did you just sort of organically know it was happening?
Yes, it was definitely a case of, I would say there were two paths to it. For our outsourced support teams, it was hearing the feedback from their leaders and saying like, hey, it's not clear what they should be doing. And so we tried a little bit to like educate them on how to engage in the conversations, and how to try and de-escalate the situation for those sort of more abusive behaviors. But it just wasn't. It always felt like it was creating a psychological stress that was not theirs to bear. Like it's not really their responsibility, and it's not really their job to have this. Whereas me, I'm in a very comfortable situation. I'm very lucky, very privileged, and I know that I don't have to like. What is it? It's that I'm not like nervous about the next interaction. I'm not nervous
Mhm.
that it's like QuickBooks desktop question, QuickBooks online question, someone telling me that they want me to die, NetSuite question, and it's not
Yeah.
like I'm not jumping from one to the
Mhm.
other. So I can be more. I can be more. I don't have quite as much stress around it, and I also don't have the same expectations from a KPI perspective or anything like that, or any concerns around that. Like
Was it
if these
affecting their KPIs, their CSAT ratings?
Not CSAT ratings, because that wasn't something that we actually didn't measure that or look at it on a per agent basis, because of these sorts of things, because they just sort of a lot of the time got
Mhm.
affected it, and so it wasn't really fair to look at it from that
I
lens.
mean, it's a little bit of an aside, but what did you measure instead of CSAT for agents?
We were looking at quality scores instead, so we were looking from the other perspective, as basically saying, do we think that this person did the right thing
Mhm.
from our knowledge of the product, and from our knowledge of the processes, and from our understanding of what the customer wanted. Yeah, so we were looking from that internal perspective rather than the external perspective.
All right, so you've got your leadership who is creating some political situations that is
Not
causing customers.
creating the political
That's
situations, to be
true.
clear,
Yes,
responding to the political
right. In
situations.
ways that some of your customers were not delighted with, and they
Yeah,
wrote in and had some
somewhat
strong
irate.
feelings, some
Yes.
spicy conversations, and then support specialists were coming up to their managers saying, "We don't know what to do." Managers were
What
coming
do
up
I
to
handle
you
this?
saying, "I don't know how to handle this," and then you responded by saying, "You know what? We should take these conversations to the source, to the
Exactly.
leadership team who's making these decisions."
Exactly.
And then,
Exactly.
yeah. So then what? How did that go?
It went okay, I would say. It was nice to be able to, like, because it was a much smaller group of people. Like, we weren't talking about 100 or so people who were trying to very rapidly learn about all of these issues. We were talking about, I think probably we were about 12 or 13 of us at the time
The
engaging in
leadership
these
team?
conversation. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
The senior leadership team, which basically includes all the senior leaders, the directors, and which also includes the C-suite as well. And
Mhm.
so it was difficult. There were sometimes it was simple. It's someone who's just sort of sending us repeated abusive messages. That's a very clear cut, easy one. Not easy, very clear cut, simple one where it's like, hey, this isn't how we do it. You did it again. Okay, well, we're just going to put a pause on this for 24 hours. We'll come back to it in 24 hours. Very happy to help you with any support problems you have after that point.
It's funny you said that. I've often felt that with spicier conversations, actually letting them stew for a little while,
Yeah,
rather than, it would be my response as a support specialist to just want to get back to everybody as quickly as possible. But I learned
yeah,
over time, they need to sit for a minute. They need to stop having the expectation of immediate replies.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like that would
Yeah.
be a tactic that I would employ as well. Sometimes where it's like someone's just going, going, going. Like I would literally send a message just like, "Cool, you let me know when you're done, and I'll address your points." And like
Mhm.
sometimes that would be a bit of an enragement point for them, or sometimes it would just be like, okay, cool, fine, yeah, like there's a person who's actually reading these messages and they're taking me seriously.
So did you answer a good portion of those, or was it pretty
Yeah,
even?
yeah. So I was certainly at the beginning. I think I was the only person in the UK on the team, only person outside of the US maybe on the team at the time. And so it was like I'd start my day and be like, okay, here's a nice big backlog. Um,
Mhm.
and so that was fine. A lot of it depended on like when we were sending newsletters. So thankfully, a lot of that was during US hours, and so we'd have the bulk of our team there to engage in those conversations. But
Mhm.
but without a doubt, it was large numbers of conversations at times. Sometimes, like I said, it was very simple. Sometimes it get a lot more complicated. Like when you're, I don't know, if you think about the topic of Black Lives Matter coming up, and just I can't view it through an American lens. Really, I'm not in the United States, and so it's a little bit more difficult for me because I'm looking at it from my sort of British lens, which has different connotations behind it, both in terms of language, but in terms of how race is manifested here and how we think about it, or how I think about it, I guess, and so trying to balance the like my own perspective and the company perspective, or whatever you would say the company perspective is, and listen to people and think like, okay, are they making sensible points? Are they making reasonable points, or is it just like uh, well, let's be honest, is it just like racism with a little veneer over it, or no veneer at times? So it was, yeah, it was. I would say it was without a doubt worth it because it was creating that psychological safety for a huge number of people who worked for Expensify, um, and and yeah, like a really, if we're advocating for taking these stances, we should also be the ones who are taking responsibility for engaging with the follow up about it as well. Like it should be your job to do that. You can't just sort of shy
As
away
the
from it.
leadership team. Yeah,
Exactly.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
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 And so at its height, how much of your day was this taking up?
Not a huge amount. I'd say at its peak, it was probably like 30 minutes to an hour at most a day. But that was really the peaky peak.
That's
There would
reasonable.
usually be, yeah, exactly. And totally worth it.
Mhm.
Like I said, to create that safety for our colleagues. Yeah.
Yeah. And so at what point did you bring your CEO in to answer some of those?
Oh, he was in it from the beginning, from the very
Okay.
beginning. Yeah, yeah, he was a
Mhm.
supporter of the project. Like he was also seeing the same problems and trying to work out how to address it. And so he was involved in the problem statements, in the design, in all of it really. He was very keen on doing it. It wasn't me just surprised being like, "Hey, David, I've got this thing, so just start now." No, it wasn't that.
Yeah.
It was him from the beginning as well.
So was there a point at which you felt like you needed to iterate? You'd created this process where these conversations were coming to you. You were using keywords,
Yeah.
and then you also had this manual process where specialists could say, "Well, I'm just basically tapping out of the
Mm,
conversation,"
yeah.
and then Was that kind of all you needed to do, or were there other tweaks you needed to make to that process?
There were definitely tweaks. So I would go through and I'd review which keywords got conversations escalated automatically, and then I would edit that list
That's
to make
great.
sure that like those false positives weren't coming up so much. And there were obviously bugs that we found with the system as well, where it was funny things where it's like if something happened to be on the next line, then it would. And it looked like it was part of the thing, then it would still automatically escalate it. One of the interesting things we found, like years later, like maybe 2 years later after we'd implemented this, was, or maybe even longer, maybe two or maybe even 3 years later, was that we found that there were people who just didn't know that this was an option, and so we found that once again there were some of our outsourced support agents who were ending up in like really awful conversations and who thought that they had to see them through, and so we
Mm,
had to sort of retrain and reinforce the process and redocument the process and just very clearly state like, no, this is not your job to be like the punching bags here. When you see this situation, either one that you're engaging in or one that you see with a colleague, there is you should always feel empowered and feel like your default is send it to the senior leaders so that they can engage with it.
what do you think the line is? What do you think the line is between I'm a support specialist, I should keep this conversation, and
Mm.
actually I'm going to wash my hands of it?
Yeah, I think in general it's when the language diverts away from process or product and diverts to person is a very clear boundary for me,
I like
where
that.
it's like, yeah, it's exactly that, where it's like
Yeah.
it's less about this product is kind of crap and more about you as a person working
Mhm,
here, you are crap. Um,
mhm,
I think there are other cases where like you can talk about product or process in a way that is not great, but for me, it's really like when you're targeting an individual person, uh, the person you're having the conversation with, or someone else. Like,
mhm,
how can how can your engineers work here? They must be absolute garbage. How dare they? How do they can't do a job? Blah 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 blah. This kind of stuff that sometimes you see coming through our support channels. That kind of stuff is like, nah, that's just like this is still work, like this is still work. That you're not just like spouting off on Twitter, right? Like, I don't understand. I don't fully understand. I understand people getting really annoyed. Like, I get really annoyed in some support interactions, but like, it's still work, and it's work for me, and it's work for the person I'm talking to most of the time.
mhm.
So just like treat it as if it's work and act accordingly. That was a total tangent, but just
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so it's I like that rubric of when it changes from being about the product or the service to being about the person that they're talking to.
or
Um,
a person they're talking about as well. Like I said,
mm,
like it doesn't
like the
necessarily
CEO,
have to
for
just be.
example.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly. He has his flaws, but he's still a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and at some point, it's just not productive. Like you
Yes.
said, a no is a no. Your
Yeah.
CEO had made the decision. A
Yeah.
person writing in and saying, "Well, you've lost my business," is not
Yeah.
necessarily going to make that change.
Yeah. That sucks. I'm sorry to hear that. If you change your mind, we are here.
Yeah. It's a bold stand to take and unusual, I think, in
Yeah.
the software world. Um,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like I said, I'm not at Expensify anymore, so I can't speak to how like I merely have 70 Expensify accounts that are associated with my personal email address, and I can tell you that there wasn't a similar newsletter sent in the last couple of months of record
Mm,
as of recording. So it's possible that's been
policy
sort of,
changed.
yeah, maybe.
So the process that you used to kind of drive those escalations manually and automatically, did you have any measurements of success? Or like, I mean, I can think of a few like agent wellness or feedback about it, but did you have anything that you said, if we meet these numbers, then we've succeeded with this process?
No, not really at all. No, it
Mhm.
was it was about creating conditions for that psychological safety that we were looking
Mm.
for. We
It's hard to
didn't
measure.
measure that. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could look at certainly our some of our vendors were measuring employee satisfaction scores, and there may have been trends in there that we could have picked out, but it was purely anecdotal, both in terms of problem identification and then later on in terms of actually hearing back afterwards that people were really relieved and grateful for taking the approach that we did and
Mhm.
making it clear that it wasn't their responsibility.
In that process, did you find you had any specialists who kind of rose to the top and found, oh, I actually like handling spicy conversations?
Yeah, there was one person who wasn't part of our senior leadership team who opted in to the responsibility as well. They did. And it was exactly that. It was like I kind of like these spicy conversations. And literally, like while we were designing it, was sort of we were talking, and they were like, "But I just join?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can, sure, like go for it. You have fun."
Yeah. It sounds like overall it was a really great experience, and you're happy with the process you created. Couple more questions. Were there any tools that helped you with that, from internal knowledge bases to just using Slack? How did you implement that?
Yeah, so at Expensify we had a like a defined project document, which was basically the embodiment of our product and process design into a single document. So I'd say Google Docs is the top one for that. Obviously
Mm.
Slack for any kind of design conversations. We were primarily like very, very widely distributed around the world and relied heavily on asynchronous communication, including for meetings effectively to discuss product changes or anything like that. And so we used Slack very heavily to have all kinds of discussions around it. There was also there was a GitHub repository that I found which had a text file in it, which was basically like, here's all the naughty words. And yeah, and so I took that as the source
For your
of
keywords.
the list, and then like trimmed out a couple of them that were creating strange sort of false positives, and went with that. Apart from that, as I said, because we grew our own help desk, our own conversation solution, it was like just work with our engineers to get it built into there.
So if I'm a customer support leader and I'm in that same position you were in for whatever
Mm,
reason, political or not, and we're getting
yep.
the influx of these really angry conversations that are not related to the product necessarily, do you have advice for me on how I could go about getting started
Yeah.
with what you did?
Absolutely. So if you're using like Help Scout, if you're using Zendesk, if you're using Intercom, the simplest way to do it is just first set up a separate inbox, set up a separate grouping of conversations, and have your senior leaders get into there. That could be more or less popular depending on where you work and how they view their own responsibilities as creating the chaos rather than just responding to the chaos, or both. Um, and then I think this, like, honestly, even if you don't have any automatic escalations, the manual step is very simple for most people and is a very quick process for most people. So just have clear expectations around when to send the conversations over. For example, if it's a particular topic, or if the conversation devolves, as we were talking about earlier. So it's no longer talking about process or product, and it's now talking about a person or people instead. Then you can move them over to that separate inbox. I honestly think that you don't need to, like, we had quite a bit of scale on our side that we wanted to have it happen both from an support team perspective. We didn't want to have to train everyone on exactly what to look for, but we also wanted it to just be able to handle getting dozens, if not hundreds, of conversations a day and putting them in the right place. But most people will not have that same scale, so you can do it pretty quickly and pretty easily just by having that sort of awkward conversation of, hey, this might not be our support team's job to engage with these conversations. Our speciality is in our product and our customer base and how they solve their problems at work. And so maybe someone else should engage in these. Think of it as a bit of all hands support, but for your senior teams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you was it your first thought to send those to the senior team? Or did you consider having managers handle those?
I certainly considered having, not managers, but I certainly considered like whether it would just be our internal support team or not, or if it would be like an opt-in group of people, before we landed eventually on this is an explicit responsibility of the senior leaders.
I just think that's beautiful. I think managers often get saddled with a lot of that, and so just skipping them, letting them do their job, and then having the senior leadership handle it. It's really wonderful.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm super excited to share this process. I had no idea walking into this we were going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is escalations and spicy conversations. So really excited. I can see how we can make it into a really clear step-by-step for folks. It just really, really cool. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. Do you have a joke for me?
I do have a joke for you. It's one of my favorites. All of my jokes come from my dad. So there's some pressure to tell them well, right? Okay, so this one is the Lone Ranger and Tonto, which is a throwback to previous generation. The Lone Ranger and Tonto are out camping and they're asleep. And the Lone Ranger wakes up and sees the sky up above with all the stars and tells this to Tonto, and the beautiful like Milky Way going over, and they're out in the middle of nowhere, and he's telling this to Tonto, and he says, "Tonto, do you know what this means?" And Tonto says, "It means somebody stole our tent." That's it for today's episode. Big thanks to Conor Pendergrast for sharing how leaders can step up and protect their teams during challenging interactions. The big takeaway here for customer escalations is to start small and focus on creating psychological safety. But you can get Conor's whole process in the show notes. Also, check out Conor's email list for encouragement and more tips on how to thrive as a customer support leader. When you subscribe to Live Chat with Jen Weaver, you'll also get access to all the playbooks from all of our episodes, including templates and other features you can use now. See you next time.